Hey guys, it's Crystal Briefs. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the uses of Jade Wyrm in War of Wonders and defending a rally. We previously saw that Jade Wyrm could be pretty useful in castle rallying due to true synergistic effect when used together with the shield familiar. But is that the case in War of Wonders and defending in a castle, or is it any useful? Those are the questions we're going to be trying to answer based on the tests I've done. If you'd like that kind of content, you might want to subscribe to my channel because I'm planning a lot of interesting and insightful videos in the future. But before getting into the actual results, let me emphasize that testing for WoW is quite challenging by nature because it's a battle between mixed comps, and the dynamics in war mechanics is so broad and profound that wonder rallying on its own is a distinct area of deep ocean. Testing for one condition can sometimes be meaningless because there might be thousands of other conditions that might produce completely different results. So do please let me know if you have any idea on a good experimental design. Now here's my experimental design. Both my testing partner and I did 857 with 4000 tier 2 troops because it's 1000th scale to a real one. 857 reflects the popularity of 424 variants, and it's an inf dominant variant to lock the target of any familiars that attack the largest squad. Here, I basically tested each viable familiar one by one without any other familiars together. And I had my testing partner do full standard lineup, which is 4 Pact 5 familiars and Griffin to better observe the effect in real Wonder Rally. And I tested in my full gear to compensate for the familiar difference. We did 4 combinations of phalanxes because in a preliminary test, Jade Wyrm actually made the result worse, and you'll probably know why if you follow my channel. Now to the long-awaited results. Here I did 857 ranged phalanx against 857 cav phalanx, and I've listed the familiars in order of performance. Helldrider came first. Since it attacks an inf squad, that is a dramatic reduction in damage dealt to my ranged frontline, so it's pretty reasonable. Inf Shield came the second, which might be surprising, but it gets clear with understanding how the familiar works. Shield familiar can absorb Pact 5 damage, and since all the Pact 5 damage goes to my inf, some of that gets absorbed by my inf shield. Plus, once my ranged is all dead, the enemy troops often transition into attack in my inf, the damage of which can be absorbed as well. Jade Wyrm came the third, which is pretty decent. So in this situation, Jade would be in the first 3 slots. The Pact 5 familiars are middle to the bottom, but here Bon Appetit, the 600% damage is just above 750% damage for the similar reason as Helldrider. Usually it's the opposite, so when Helldrider shines, the 600% damage familiars could become more beneficial than 750% one. Anyway, I do think people should be using familiars other than fixed damage one more often, since fixed damage is not looking great anymore. However, the Pact 5 familiars produce a stable effect in all kinds of situations, and that goes well with switching comp in a fort. Since some familiar lineups confine the options of a formation, it's not a terrible mistake to be using fixed damage familiars. Another important thing to note is that Jade Wyrm do reduce Pact 5 damage, so if the opponent had Jade Wyrm, I think you should be using Jade Wyrm as well. Now to the next condition. My 857 in cav phalanx took 857 ranged phalanx, and here Jade Wyrm came second after the cav shield, which is pretty good. And you might be thinking there might be a synergistic effect when shield and Jade are used together. And in fact they do, confirmed in preliminary experiments, but not as much as in castle rallies. Griffin and Goblin actually came afterwards, but above the Pact 5 familiars. What's striking is that Helldrider is at the worst among the possible familiars, producing almost no effect, in contrast to the previous situation. So Helldrider is a really interesting familiar, and if you can use it with the right comp and timing, it's overpowered. But otherwise, it might be a waste. In the next condition, we both did 857 cav phalanx. In this one, Jade Wyrm actually did the best, tying with the cav stacker. However, if you compare the rate of improvement by calculating the rate of reduction and increase in casualties, Cav Stacker has a bit higher rate of improvement. Higher rate of improvement means higher chance of winning, so Cav Stacker may be slightly better than Jade Wyrm in this particular situation. The Inf Shield came the next, again for similar reasons I've previously explained. Cav Foul versus Cav Foul situation surprisingly does not host a mechanism in which Cav gets completely destroyed when using 1-2 hero comp, which will be another video. And look at Helldrider again. It's kind of funny at this point. It's the most whimsical familiar ever, I guess. In the last condition, I did 857 Inf Phalanx countering 857 Cav Phalanx. Griffin aced in this situation, which was a bit surprising to me even. I knew Griffin would be very good, but didn't expect it to be the best. So I guess Jade Wyrm don't completely replace Griffin in all situations. Actually, I think Griffin is the one allowing a 4-2-4 variant in Cav Phalanx to counterintuitively beat 4-4-2 variants. And it's explainable theoretically, which is another video. The Inf Shield came the second, and Jade Wyrm the third. Helldrider is towards the bottom, although not too terrible because it hit the same troop type as my frontline, which is Inf. Like, if your Helldrider hits the enemy troop type your frontline counters, it's certainly a waste. But I guess maxed accounts are privileged to always put Helldrider and still win. For us who always need to confront a stronger opponent or a guild, we should carefully choose our familiar lineup to beat them out of their butt. Overall, for Wonder Rallies, Jade Wyrm seems to always be in the top 5 choices of familiars in terms of the effectiveness. The effect it produces is less stable than Pact 5 familiars, but even at the worst case, Jade seems to perform better than the Pact 5 familiars. At its best, it produces a very similar effect to a shield familiar even, so I'd say it's the most versatile familiar to be used in Wonder Rallies. So in my opinion, you should prioritize Jade Wyrm over other Pact 5 familiars to upgrade if you want to increase the chance of winning in War of Wonders. But bear in mind that Jade Wyrm may work against you when doing 4-4 ranged phalanx against 4-4 ranged phalanx, which I've explained in one of my previous videos, link in the description. Just a random thought, it might be a fun game actually to find a situation in which a Pact 5 familiar outperforms Jade Wyrm. I guess the recent familiar updates are putting emphasis on low score games in which we're competing with smaller casualties. For IGG, more troops dying would be better for increasing their revenue, so we're maybe soon getting another update that increases our troop consumption. It's just a guess. Now, you might be wondering which familiar to swap out for Jade Wyrm. I'd remove 600% Pact 5 familiar of a non-dominant troop type. So if you're doing 9 for 7, 600% familiar for Cav would be removed. You can remove Griffin, but if your stats is not as high as my account, Griffin might still be quite useful. Also, Griffin can promote some mechanisms that benefits you when Jade Wyrm cannot, so you should still use Griffin in some situations. By the way, as a 055 lover, I'm a bit concerned that Helldrider and Jade Wyrm is making 055's life more difficult. Still by far the best carpet-free counter against 4-4 though. Alright, now let's move on to castle defending. I tested 2 comps of a castle, one of them almost capping and the other is a definite cap by more than doubling the troop count. On a camp, I took 2375 tier 2 Cav Blast in Phalanx. So I'm simulating the worst case scenario here, and I tested familiars one by one with 4 slots empty. This one is a near cap one. And Jade Wyrm came 5th in this listing. Helldrider is the best by far, and Tempestite is also doing good. But in reality, we don't put Helldrider and Tempestite together due to compatibility issues. So Jade might be your 3 or 4th slot choice if you've got all familiars on the table and your troop count is around 20 million. In fact, we can also observe a strong synergistic effect between the Shield Familiar and the Jade Wyrm. This combination improved the result by this much, which is much more than the individual effect added together. However, sometimes this combo produces less effect like this. Let me know in the comment if you can think of why. Hellrider, Shield, and Jade Wyrm, they're super compatible. But for low spenders, I don't think Jade Wyrm is necessary considering the difficulty to upgrade. And you'll also need the Shield Familiar to get the most out of it. In contrast, you should try to obtain Hellrider if you're doing a trap. It's the best preparation for the worst case scenario. Here, Pyrus did 0 because the hero's tactical skill got absorbed by the buffer troops. Now, what about the effect of Jade Wyrm in a bigger comp? So in the next condition, I nearly tripled the troop count and without changing any other stuff. And here's the results. Look at that. The effect of the Inf Shield is overpowered. This can be explained by the nature of the familiar talent. The Shield Familiar cancels out the incoming damage that would have killed 7% of the troops. It protects a percentage of troops, so more troops means more absolute number of troops being protected. If you get 1 million troops, the shield only cancels 70k troop damage, but with 10 million troops it cancels 700k troop damage, which is huge. And the shield only disappears after absorbing 700k troop damage. If we get the synergistic effect with Jade Wyrm, that's gonna be overpowered. But in this case, we failed to get the synergy going. It could be that the shield continue to activate all the way till the end with or without Jade Wyrm, since Jade Wyrm activates at the same time as Shield Familiar in this particular comp. Kinda regret not watching the movie before trashing the report. So for castle defending, Jade Wyrm is only useful for the lower end of a troop count, maybe up to around 30 million troops. And it's best used together with a Shield Familiar in order to get powerful synergy up, but which together costs a lot for a low spender. So I guess Jade Wyrm is really for rally leads who got most of the options available. And this will be my new familiar lineup on the wall. I think that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and see you later.